if we get far enough into chapter 11. But I get this messianic magazine called Zion's Fire. And when you read Messianic Jewish literature, they are really big on prophetic unfoldings and the return of Yeshua and what's going on in the Middle East and Russia and Ukraine and so on. And they do it in a way that's not like fear-mongering and like endless speculation. Some of it is speculative, but they're not like off the rails. And so I've been able to glean some good stuff from them. And the most recent article, which I found interesting, I was talking to Jeannie about, is this fellow was saying how he feels that many seminaries, many Bible college, many churches do God's people a great disservice right now by assuring them that the Lord is going to return before the tribulation. So you don't have anything to worry about. You won't be here. So don't worry. Be happy. And he quotes, and if I remember, I'll bring it next time. He quotes and he gives a list of all the church fathers from the early centuries who warned the church to be ready to go through a period of tribulation if that happened to be the generation. So all these church fathers, Tertullian and Origen and many others, believed that the church was going to be in the tribulation and Jesus would return sometime in the middle or latter part of the tribulation. Pre-tribulationism is a relatively new position that really began to get ahead of steam in the early 1900s. And early on, in seminary time and ministry, that's where I would have come down. I would have said, yeah, I believe in a pre-trib, premillennial position. But the more I've looked at passages from Daniel and Thessalonians and 2 Peter and all these other Revelation, obviously, I really am not so sure that we, meaning believers, are not going to be part of the Great Tribulation. And so, as Lee pointed out a few weeks back, the position to take is not fear, it's being prepared. It's having your spiritual ducks in a row. So if that is the case, that we won't go into a panic, stop coming to church, stop gathering together, live like pagans in a crisis. I want to read to you before we get into Daniel 11 from Spurgeon that fits in nicely with this whole idea of not fearing as the days become more and more evil. I don't know if you've noticed in the news now there was this rebellion of these forces in the Ukraine. Russian forces rebelled against Putin, and they tried to get other Russians to join in with them. That didn't go so well. Now the guy's on the lam. But it shows that there's fracturing within the military and administrative side of the Russian government. And who knows where this will go. One guy was saying, if a coup happens in Russia, you never know who's going to get their hands on power. And they have so many nuclear weapons. And all it takes is the wrong hothead, the wrong person to get in there and we're off to the races. But anyway, in light of all that, here's what Spurgeon says. He says, why do you fear? Why do you allow yourself to be anxious? What possible use does your worrying serve? You are aboard such a large ship that you would be unable to steer it even if your captain placed you at the helm. You would not even be able to adjust the sails, yet you worry as if you were the captain or the helmsman of the vessel. Be quiet, dear soul. God alone is the master. Do you think all the commotion and the uproar of this life is evidence that God has left the throne? He has not. His mighty steeds rush furiously ahead, and his chariots are the storms themselves. But the horses have bridles, and it is God who holds the reins. guiding the chariots as he will. Our God, Jehovah, is still the master. Believe this, and you will have peace. Do not be afraid, says Jesus in Matthew 14. Good counsel from Spurgeon. Okay, when we get into Daniel chapter 11, we could entitle this Tribulation, duly fulfilled first under Antiochus Epiphanes and then the Antichrist. Keep in mind these historical prophecies in chapter 11, most biblical scholars will say have dual fulfillment. Now you can get bogged down in this chapter because the prophecies involve the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, these warring families back in the 2nd century. And there's a lot of historical, prophetical information, and your eyes kind of like look at it and go, what is this? I don't even know what he's talking about here. But there's a dual fulfillment to this. Some of it I'll capsulize, some of it I'll read and try to bring clarity to it. So 11, verses 1-4, chapter 11, the first 4 verses encapsulate the time period from the Persian Empire to the Greeks. So let me read the first 4 verses. Actually, I'm going to go back, and we didn't read these last verses from chapter 10. So to set context, let me read from verse 13 onward. When he had spoken to me according to these words, and remember, this is the angelic being that talks to Daniel in chapter 10 and basically tells him, you, Daniel, have been praying for understanding as to the time period of the restoration of God's people back into Jerusalem. The answer has come to you from God's throne weeks ago, but the prince of Persia, which is a demonic territorial spirit, has opposed the answer to your prayer. And not only I, but the archangel Michael has helped me in the battle to get your prayer through, which is fascinating insight into intercession and petition and the spiritual conflict that takes place in the heavenly realms that we can't access by our senses. I turned my face towards the ground and was mute. And behold, one in the likeness of the children of man touched my lips, another angel. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man, greatly loved. And remember, Daniel was greatly loved in heaven because he lived well upon the earth. And what's true of Daniel can be true of us. Do not fear. Fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened, and I said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, demonic, territorial, controlling spirit. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come, another territorial spirit. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. Now we get to chapter 11. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. He's talking about Alexander the Great there. So the occasion for the spiritual battle of chapter 10 was the restoration of a believing remnant that will go back to the Holy Land. Satan, apparently determined to derail this restoration and thwart God's messianic plans. And what is God's plan? It's been unwavering. One plan, that's the salvation, the redemption of humanity through Israel, and then through the church to the world. That's missions. That's us, our local mission and missions abroad. One plan for the ages through Israel, then through the church to the world. God apparently allows Satan great but not absolute latitude. He is the God of this world, which has many implications. We've talked about that. So now think about this for a minute. The supreme effort to eradicate the Jews would come about 55 years after chapter 10. Do you remember what that occasion was? Daniel's praying about the restoration of Israel, and these demonic forces oppose his prayer. About 55 years later, there would be a grand plan to eradicate all the Jews. Do you remember what that was? Esther, yeah. Xerxes, Haman, Mordecai, Esther. The edict goes out through all of the Persian Empire that we're going to kill the Jews on a certain day. Is the Feast of Purim, the casting of lots. The Jews celebrate to this day to celebrate the fact that God thwarted the plans of the enemy working through Xerxes and Haman to eliminate all the Jews. Later, Antiochus Epiphanes tried to obliterate the Jewish faith by forbidding its rituals on the pain of death. That happened between 167 and 164 BC. So here's a sidebar. There is an escalation of anti-Semitism right now in the world that is raging in Europe especially, and here in the United States. I've seen commercials on TV where Jews get up there and say, you need to be aware that there's a rising climate, heated climate of anti-Semitism in America. We hear a lot about Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all these things, but there is intense persecution of Jews happening right now. Perhaps in light of Romans 11, why do you think there's an escalation of anti-Semitism? Europe, here, why do you think that's happening? Any ideas why that might be? Jerry? Well, there were many Jews actually migrating to Israel. That's true. And remember, this is all spiritual. People don't realize that. But there's spiritual opposition, I think, like you're saying, to maybe Jews migrating to the Holy Land and fortifying the land there. There has always been the Christ killer syndrome. The Jews have killed the Christ. They are cursed by God, and they will use that as an excuse to persecute them. Any other reasons why you think anti-Semitism might be ramping up? Mike? Everybody gets a gold medal.
Yeah, and everybody has, has to be the same, whereas Jews, they are a distinct race, and they're not fitting into the equality.
That's an interesting point. Jews, the, the, the serious Jews, not the liberal, godless Jews, but the serious Jews have never really assimilated into any culture. They are Jews and they are distinct from the culture, and they are resented because of that. If any of you ever been around in New York City, if you go to Brooklyn and you go to Williamsburg, it's like going back to the first century. It's all Hasids. They don't want Gentiles. They don't assimilate. They work. I mean, a lot of them are in the diamond industry. They make a profit, but they absolutely have nothing to do with Gentiles. My uncle owned a store in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. Jeannie and I would go up there when we were first married. He owned a little general store after he retired from the. He was a construction in the local, like the Teamsters, but he got out of that and he bought this little store. And he was telling me, in the summer, a lot of Hasidic Jews would come and vacation there, and they would come in and they would buy things from him. But when they exchanged money, they would drop money into his hand, and he had to drop money into their hand. The Jew would not touch him because he was unclean. He was a Gentile. And that ruffles people's feathers. Like, who do you think you are, What do you mean I'm unclean and you alone are clean? So I think because of the way that the serious Hebrews practice their faith, they're not just one like everybody else. But I think there's even another reason. Joe and Jeannie. Oh. Yeah, there were a bunch of Hasidic Jews. We were flying back to Denver from Newark years ago, and this Jewish group got up by the counter, and they were having people, and there was a long line. Everybody's waiting to check in, and they were having pictures taken of themselves, like the counter, like oblivious to everybody else. People were furious, and it's like that's like the entitlement. We're the chosen. We're God's people. We could do this. Joe? They were Hasidics. They were the real serious Jews.
I think also, though, the anti-Semitism comes because Jewish people, particularly those who practice the Torah, are still reminding people of God.
Yes. Yes.
This God, the Jewish people, whatever you want to call it, Jesus came from that.
Mm-hmm.
And God works in the world in part through Jewish people. That reminder of God.
Yeah, Job brings out the point that the Jews remind people that there is a God Almighty, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through whom Jesus appeared. Kalajin, you raised your hand too. Yes. Probably envious, because the reality is, and I'm being stereotypical here, but Jews, by and large, tend to be very gifted people. They are very smart. You see, for every one Jewish auto mechanic, there's 5,000 doctors. You know what I mean? And I'm not disparaging auto mechanics, but I'm just saying Jews seem to be gifted in the area of the arts and science and education. A lot of people resent that. They are very good at business, and people don't like that either. Did you say something, Mike?
Well, it's the same thing. They had, reason Nazi Germany, they had an inordinate amount of wealth and power
Yes.
and authority. They were bankers, lawyers, you know, they were the elite.
Yes.
You know, and not, and it was wrong because, you know, not all of them were, you know, a percentage were, but they were, the ones that were truly wealthy and powerful.
Yeah, and Hitler believed, and his line of propaganda is the Jews are sucking the economy dry where Germans could be prospering. It's the Jews that are prospering. And if we only get rid of the Jews, then the Germans will all prosper and will be the super race that we were intended to be, and so on. So that was the Kristallnacht. That's 39, right? Where they all destroyed German Jewish businesses and all and started hauling them away. Yeah. Oh, I saw that. Yeah. Yeah. That was Helen Mirren was in that movie. It was very good. We watched that a couple of years ago. Woman in Gold. Here's another reason. All these reasons we talk about, Jerry brought them up, Joe, Jeannie, Mike. If we are edging closer to the time of tribulation and the return of God's Messiah, and Romans 11 says, and then all Israel will be saved. Now that might be hyperbole. It might just mean a lot of Jews are going to come to the faith in the Messiah. Would it not make sense that the enemy is also ramping up persecution against God's chosen people, that doesn't want these Jews responding to the gospel of grace, coming to the Messiah? Our friend Chaim, who passed away a couple of months ago, would always, I mean, he was always in the boxing ring. You know, spiritual opposition, conflict is common to every believer who's serious in their faith. But as Jewish believers, he seemed to get an exceptional dose of it. You know, he was like, you know, the bop bag where you just keep punching him, knocking him down, and he gets up again. And it was difficult. And Chaim said something interesting to me one time. He said, you know, not to diminish slavery in the United States. It was a terrible thing starting somewhere around 1611, a couple of hundred years, and then there were residual effects of it. He said, nobody has suffered like the Hebrews. He said, nobody. It's 400 years of slavery in Egypt, building pyramids in the desert, persecution for the last how many thousands of years wherever Jews are. He said, I understand how difficult slavery was in the United States. He said, but it pales in comparison to the suffering of the Hebrew people.
Yeah, you're right. The Jews have a part maybe this oppression growing is really demonic and spiritual.
I think so.
Not necessarily some of these practical reasons that Paul brought up. Could just be we're getting near maybe, and nearer and nearer, and this demonic, like last stand to try to eradicate what is prophesied.
Yeah, if you saw the Passion of the Christ, and probably everybody has, if you remember that as the Satan figure comes on strong to Jesus in the garden because he knows that the crucifixion looms and that Jesus intends to be the atoning sacrifice, the Lamb of God. And he says to Jesus in the garden, he says, who are you? Who is your Father? Really, no one can bear the sin of mankind. That load is too heavy. You cannot bear it. You know, trying to tempt Jesus at the 11th hour, right before the cross, to abandon his mission. And I think it may be that we're that close to this time of tribulation that Daniel and Revelation and Ezekiel refer to, that the enemy is ramping up opposition to God's chosen people. We are his chosen covenant people now as the church, but I'm talking about the Jews through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I think there's something to that. I don't think it's just coincidental that suddenly there's this rise in anti-Semitism. Historical note, I mentioned Greece. In 7 to 8 years, Alexander the Great accomplished the most dazzling military conquest in human history. After a drunken bout, he died of fever, maybe poisoned, in 323 BC in Babylon. And then when you get to verse 5, you have the wars between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And again, scholars anticipate a dual fulfillment in light of Ezekiel 38, Matthew 24, Revelation 13, 2 Thessalonians 2. So bear with me. I'm going to read, and you may fog over through this, but I'm going to read 5 through 20. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be great authority. After some years, they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. Remember, these are all prophecies of things to come. And he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off into Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north. He shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands. But he shall not prevail, for the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. You'll see how this all fits in just a minute. In those times, many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, that's Israel, with destruction in his hand. This is a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes and the Antichrist. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward, he shall turn his face from the coastlands and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back towards the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. A lot of historical information prophesied there. We can't remember all of it. King of the south is Ptolemy the First. His domain was primarily Egypt and Cyprus. The stronger one that's referred to is Seleucus. The daughter was Laodice, who assassinated her rival Bernice and poisoned her own husband Antiochus. That's all he's talking about there, but there are these vague little snippets of allusion to what's going to be happening in the Holy Land during the time of the Great Tribulation. So I'm going to keep reading. I know this is a lot to process, but there's these next verses are especially important. Verse 21 says, where am I? Hold on a second. In his place shall arise a contemptible person, to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. We're going to get back to that in a minute. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. Now think about 2 Thessalonians 2 in light of what I'm just reading here. And he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. Verses 21 through 35, I didn't read all of them yet, refers initially to the great persecution of the Jewish people under Antiochus Epiphanes. And it's interesting, think of 2 Thessalonians. You have to read these verses in light of other eschatological material to be able to get what's going on, like Revelation 13, like Matthew 24. In 2 Thessalonians 2, the man of lawlessness, what does he do when he goes in and desecrates the temple midway through the tribulation? He declares himself what? To be God. He declares himself to be God. Blasphemy. Antiochus Epiphanes is a forerunner of a type of the coming Antichrist. Epiphanes means illustrious God. So he's declaring, Antiochus is declaring himself to be the illustrious God in Israel, which is utter blasphemy. The Jews go crazy. And then in 2 Thessalonians 2, that the same thing is going to happen, only to a greater degree with the man of lawlessness. So these verses are devoted to the career of the tyrannical oppressor who did his best in the 2nd century to destroy and eradicate the Hebrews. Well, I'm going to go back to verse 23 again and talk about this for a minute. Verse 23, it says this, "And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people," maybe with a small initial group of support that will mushroom. And that's Antiochus in the 1st century, but a dual reference to the coming man of lawlessness, the Antichrist. So what is this reminiscent of? What is the strategy of the Antichrist? Antiochus, think about this, Antiochus, the way he would conquer areas is he would do this. His strategy was to throw intended victims off guard by offering friendship and allegiance. So, what might this look like practically when the man of lawlessness begins to rise in power? Is he going to just come on the scene and go, hey, guess what? I'm the Antichrist. Everybody follow me. I don't think so. What's that? It's going to be more crafty. What did you say? Sly? Yeah, I think so. I think it's not going to be some dramatic expose. I'm the man of lawlessness. I think things are going to be, he's going to be very sophisticated, smooth talker, a unifier. Dave? Yeah, it's the Great Reset. Is anybody familiar with that term? The Great Reset. It's like we want to reset the way our country is run, the way the world is run. It's not good. We want it unified. We want consistency. And people in government are buying into all that. You're right, Dave. Well, Jeannie points out, I didn't know that Hannibal, who was the mighty warrior who crossed the Alps and gave Rome a lot of trouble, was defeated. But then apparently Antiochus Epiphanes seduced him into coming over with him. Yeah. Yeah, and Rome would give them a lot of latitude. They would be able to govern themselves to a point. And if you got out of line, Rome was absolutely ruthless because that's how they were able to govern such a empire that was spread so thinly. That's why they were hated in Palestine, because they were so ruthless if the Jews got out of line. Yes. It was just and people say this all the time. COVID was what it is, and many people died, many people suffered. That's true. But what was amazing was how easily people were controlled, uh, regardless of where you came down on anything. And I remember, you'd hear Christians, and some of them were extremists, they were kind of off the rails, but they just said, if we can be controlled this easily because of a virus, yeah, and that quickly, you can't go outside, you can't do this, can't do that, and just imagine when this person with the power, ultimate power of the evil one behind him gets into authority, how easily people are going to be fearful and how easily they're going to be controlled, unless, to go back to what we said in the very beginning, we thatch our roofs, we know what we believe, we bond together, band together as the church, and we stay firm, we stay focused, because it's going to be a hellish environment. And COVID was just a little picture, like, boy, people did whatever authority said. And if you bucked the system, you hated your neighbor. You wanted your neighbor to die, you wanted, blah, blah, and they had all this information out there. Um, anyway, and evidently this man of lawlessness is going to enact some type of peace treaty that averts war in the Middle East, perhaps even Europe, perhaps globally. And what will this man of lawlessness maybe have to offer? Why would you follow a person like this? Stability. If the world is in chaos, let's just say the wrong people. Let's say Putin gets overthrown and the wrong people get their hands on power in Russia and somebody does something crazy, like unleashes a nuclear attack on a strategic attack on Ukraine. Who knows what the response will be? Who knows where something like that would go? It wouldn't take much to destabilize our economy, the way we buy, the way we sell. People will be in a panic, and this person will offer some type of stability, especially in the Middle East, which is highly unstable to begin with. Except on a much grander scale. Because in World War I, we didn't have the communications, we didn't have the ability to travel at warp speed all over the globe. But you're right, with Franz Ferdinand's assassination, all kinds of things, pride propelled different leaders in different countries, and before you know it, we were off and running in World War I, and how many people were lost. And that's just a snippet of what we anticipate when this man of lawlessness takes power. Because think about this, maybe what he will offer, a prosperous economy, unified currency maybe a military coalition of a 10-league nation, the restored Roman Empire. Remember the 10-horned beast with the little horn that comes up, which is the man of lawlessness. Maybe a unified religious environment. Remember, how many times do you hear people say in our world, you know what the problem is? It's religion. Everybody believes different things. Nobody has the truth. And how many wars have been fought over religion in the history of mankind? Many of them. Muslims and Christians, and in India, Buddhists and Muslims and Hindus. Maybe there will be at this time an enforced, unified religion, worshiping the man of lawlessness. That's the solution. We'll all just worship the same, and we won't have any religious discord anymore. Could be something like that. Just speculation, but who knows? Epiphanes would, after he would win people over, he would be conciliatory, he was a good negotiator, and after he would win people over, then he would maneuver for an advantageous position and turn on those who supported him. And what does 2 Thessalonians 2 say? Midway through this 7-year period, the worm turns, and he announces this is the abomination of desolation that Jesus speaks of. I am God. And then the second half of the tribulation is the time of Jacob's troubles, where things intensify, the heated physical persecution of God's people. Here's a question. Can this man of lawlessness hope to be recognized by God's people? What do you think? Do you think, and if we are going to be that generation, which is possible, then it stands to reason the man of lawlessness is already on the scene somewhere, but he just hasn't made that move. He hasn't risen to power. There's still things that have to happen. Can we, as God's people, without playing wild guessing games, hope to recognize this person? Well, Jeannie points out the perils of AI, which you just know is going to go to bad places. But you could just picture someone in leadership getting the right hold of the right technology and promoting. You could promote images of anybody and have them say anything, and they really didn't. Like they come on TV and go, "Hi, I'm so and so, and this is how we need to support so and so," and it's not even the real person. It's artificial intelligence, and you can't tell the difference. Did you have something, Mike?
Well, I was just saying, I read in the paper the other day, there was an actual church service.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
That there was an image, artificial intelligence image that gave a sermon, and the people were worshiping in that congregation.
And as the door turns on its hinges, so does a sluggard on his bed. How do you know I'm really here and not turning on my bed right now?
That's where you would like to be.
Casey could be projecting me this morning. Yes. Well, Kelly Jean's point is, and you sent an article I got the other day about the severity of biblical ignorance amongst Christians. There are many churches where you would never sing that last song we sung, "What can wash away my sin?" You would not hear about the blood of Jesus. Way too negative, dark. We don't want that. We sing uplifting, joyous songs, and we don't stay with the scriptures. There's a lot of like philosophizing and popular stuff. And incidentally, speaking of popular stuff, you remember who M. Scott Peck was? You remember that name? He was a psychologist. He wrote the Road Less Traveled years ago. Super popular book. He was a non-believer, and he wrote the Road Less Traveled. And it was about love and joy and peace and all that stuff. And anyway, later on in his life, he wrote that he, in his counseling, encountered people with such severe issues that he could only explain them spiritually, like demonic oppression, and he became a believer before he died. So he was a naturalist, and he was confronted with the supernatural in patients that he dealt with, and he said, "This is just way beyond the pale. This is not normal psychological issues. And he started to believe what Scripture teaches." You'd be in real trouble. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Jeannie talks about the control issue of AI, how it's so invasive and intrusive. And many of us here live in a world where we're not affected by that, at least at this point, but it's out there, and it's really growing at a rapid rate. Let's ask this. Without being overly sensational and speculative, we want to keep balance, stay on the rails. How can I, as a Jesus follower, perhaps recognize final pieces falling into place that will lead up to this time of tribulation? What might I recognize that's going on in my world? AI is one of them, that might alert me to the fact that, this could happen soon. Digital currency, another way of control. And I've heard people in our own government get up and profess we need a one world, non-paper currency.
Can't use cash at the ballpark.
No, you can't.
Everything is credit card. That seems to be, I never thought that would ever happen. And that's honest.
And there's always a nice rational excuse for it. It was COVID that put that into place. But it's just another way of monitoring and controlling. Everybody will do exactly what we say the way we say it. And remember, we don't know what the mark of the beast is, the ability to buy and sell. There's endless speculation on that. It was a deal in the first century where if you didn't have a certain, I forget what it was, Pastor Ryan was talking about it, you couldn't engage in commerce. But you could see where if you don't have a certain credit card, for example, you can't buy anything. Well, what do? You know, you go into Whole Foods and say, well, I don't have that card. I just have, well, can't have any food, sorry. You know, it's not unreasonable to think something like that could happen. Well, Jeannie mentions those QR codes that we see all the time. You can't walk into the gym and they go, hi Ed, how you doing? It's like, you know, they track you. You gotta put your thing. Linda, did you have something? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things we look for, perhaps, is this burgeoning and mushrooming at warp speed, n- new Green Deal religious fervor. Like if you're not fully on board, you're the enemy of the planet. You know, you got to be electric car, got to have you know, you can't, electric, so can't have gas, can't do this. It's all absurd. And like Mike said, it's irrational. It's naive. It's not functional. But all these people are like, yeah, we're behind. Everything has to be. What else could we look for as the times ramp up? Yeah, if you don't agree with these certain political, sexual agendas, you're the enemy. You are a hater, you're the enemy, and you are holding back progress for unity in the world. What about, here's a couple of more as we wind down here. What else might happen to cause us to recognize that the time of Jacob's troubles might be close at hand? How about a invasion of Israel? Israel put in peril. They're always in peril, but you have insane, demonically influenced leaders in countries wanting nothing more than the eradication of Israel. How about catastrophic economic collapse? Or, and Dave, you know more about this than anybody, the collapse of a power grid or attack on a power grid in our nation. Yeah, I listened. You talked about the problems that the power grid and the online capabilities to hack into these things caused problems in the Middle East. I was listening to some show a while back, and this guy was talking about how underprepared we are to protect our grid in the United States. And with internet access, who knows, madmen can do anything. And imagine if power went out, how dependent we are on power. You know, you might have a gas generator, but you have to get gas somewhere, and if there's no power, gas stations don't operate. Just think how life would shut down almost immediately. You'd have chaos in the streets if the power grid ever went down, people trying to survive. Do you have something, Jerry?
Yeah, the one step worse than power is
Right. Yes. Yeah, Jerry brings out even worse than the power grid is water. And every once in a while, you hear reports on how the government is so concerned that terrorists could poison our water supply or cities' water supplies, which would completely incapacitate people. Remember just what happened in Ohio with that train spill. When was that? In the fall? There was no drinking water. They said, oh, you better not drink, and nobody would bring drinking water in because they were afraid of being contaminated by the air. And that was just one small town. How about this? How about very unusual, terrifying natural disasters? Doesn't Jesus talk about that? And look at what we see. Earthquakes, tornadoes in Highlands Ranch. When does that usually happen? Yeah, sinkhole over on Jackass Hill on Mineral. How about ramped up persecution of God's covenant people? That's the Jews. We talked about that. Will we even be initially aware of the role he's playing? And will he, the Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, be aware of who he is and what role he's playing? I don't know. I mean, is it not inconceivable that he could be some spiritual dupe thinking he's doing this great thing for humanity, and meanwhile he's being empowered by the devil? I mean, without being over the top with this, I mean, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you look at what is transpiring in on our planet, and it wouldn't take much to get the ball rolling where things would get out of control, where this diplomatic, smooth, sophisticated, savvy person, whether he be from the Middle East, whether he be from Europe, steps in and offers to broker some type of peace for God's covenant people in Israel, and people go, wow, what a wonderful solution. What a great leader. And then 3.5 years into this rule, his true colors are shown. In verse 27, let me just do a couple of things before we leave. In verse 27, and as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the time appointed. Now, that phrase, the end, initially pertained to the permanent suspension of Antiochus' attempt to annex Egypt to his domain. And then in verse 28, it says, and he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his old land. The holy covenant, the religious establishment in Jerusalem, serious persecution begins under Antiochus. We'll stop there, and next time I want to try to tackle the rest of chapter 11 and maybe be able to summarize chapter 12. There's a few key elements in chapter 12 I want to tackle as we wrap the book up. Dave? Right. There's a good use of technology, Dave. He has the amplified version, and it's true. The four winds are the four generals that took over from Alexander, and none of them were ever as powerful, came even close to doing what he did.
Yeah, one last thought, very good question, Chris. We talked about all these calamities and all these signs and whatnot. It seems like God is losing control, but isn't God still in control throughout all these things we're talking about?
Yeah.
And ultimately.
Yeah, that's what Spurgeon said right there when he said, why be fearful? What do you think? Like you're in charge of steering the ship? You know, even if we put you in charge, you wouldn't be able to do it. He said, the Lord is the captain, and he'll get the boat where it needs to go. In between, though, in the sovereign will of God, he's going to allow a lot of catastrophic things to happen. And our role or our job is to be unified, to guard sound doctrine, to love God and love each other, to have influence for the gospel here and abroad, and not to fear, to enjoy life as God gives it to us, like on a bright sunny day like this. We'll stop there and we'll pick up again, finish chapter 11. We're closing in on the end of Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. How about if we stop there? Jeannie, why don't you pray for us, and then we'll disperse and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Amen. Yeah, enjoy all the grace gifts of a beautiful day. Thank you guys for being here and all your participation. See you next time.